All right, my name is Parviz Malakouti. I'm a citizenship and immigration attorney, and this is our 12th Mobility Spaces. And today's topic is, where is the EU headed? CBI, RBI, and governance. There's a few topics, subtopics that I would like to discuss and give my opinion on, and of course, get the opinion of anybody else who'd like to talk. As a reminder, this is a totally open discussion. Anybody who would like to speak is welcome to do so. You can just send me a request and I will accept it right away. So, couple topics, couple timely topics, couple that have been percolating for a little while now. First of all, we have the Malta ECJ opinion, European Court of Justice opinion from April 2025. There's already been kind of a first wave of information and analysis regarding that, including myself. I tweeted about it previously, but I want to talk about that a little bit more, and then specifically what it means for the future of citizenship by investment in Europe. Also, there's the news that the EU has implemented its visa-free suspension mechanism for CBI countries. Okay, so that's a mechanism whereby the EU can more easily suspend visa-free access to citizens of countries that offer citizenship by investment. So that's, of course, another attack vector for CBIs. Next, a fourth topic that's really interesting, especially for Americans, is ETIAS. Okay, is ETIAS, the electronic travel authorization for visa-free access to Europe? Is it coming in 2026? Europe's been pushing it back over and over and over again. The last time I wrote an article about it in 2023, it was supposed to be implemented by the end of 2024. So that is set for 2026. If or when ETIAS is inevitably implemented, what's it going to mean for Americans? Is it really just going to be one easy form to fill out, or is it actually going to be kind of the beginning of the camel sticking its nose into the tent in terms of soliciting information, whereby to use to deny people access? So criminal records, travel to particular places, perhaps espousing certain views online that are considered hateful. Could that now be a way that Americans can be denied visa-free access to Europe? So I want to talk about that. Hand in hand with that, free speech. What's the state of free speech in European Union countries? Obviously, we can't paint with too broad of a brush here. We're talking about 25 plus countries, but Germany and UK. Then we have fairly recent news from the last few months of Italian citizenship by descent being restricted to grandparents, to the grandparent level, right? That's, of course, of great interest to Americans, given that the zenith of immigration to the United States from Europe is basically the generation of great-grandparents of a lot of people living in the United States right now. And then we have the most recent news here, which is possible expansion of Portuguese citizenship by descent. So we got some interesting topics, subtopics here, all related to where the EU is headed. Okay, free-floating conversation. We don't have to go in any particular order, but I want to start off by talking about the Malta ECJ opinion. Okay, in April 2025. So probably most people who are listening to this are in the space following the progress of Malta's citizenship by investment program. But for anybody who's not, a quick recap is basically that Malta has a citizenship by investment program. It's kind of a little bit of a hybrid. It's kind of a hybrid CBI, RBI, residence by investment, because technically the applicant has to have a period of residency for at least 1 year. And that had been challenged by the EU Commission, okay, in a court case, okay, that went up to the ECJ. Long story short, the ECJ ruled in April, in their opinion, that the program as it stands right now is unlawful. Okay, it's a medium length opinion. I think it's about 16 pages, if I'm not mistaken, around there. There's a wide variety of rationale that's covered, but I believe the upshot is that basically the ECJ says that Malta's program constitutes a violation of, in large part, two terms of basically EU treaties. One is Article 20, the other is Article 4.3. And these basically have to do with obligations of member states, to be in cooperation with other member states in the EU, as well as what citizenship means in the EU. In the ECJ opinion, one of the main rationale that was relied upon is the fact that although by by the terms, residency is required. In reality, very minimal physical presence is required for applicants in Malta. So I think that's kind of the guidepost, right, that people are looking at, especially professionals, in terms of what types of programs for citizenship by investment or residency by investment can be viable in the future in the European Union. So we'll start off with this topic. I'll start off with a question for Patrick. We're joined now by Patrick McFawn, of course. He's a consultant for citizenship by descent, and of course, he's a great contributor to these spaces. So, first question, Patrick, is this: do you think, given the ECJ opinion, by the way, it's linked to the spaces, the opinion, as well as a tweet that I made a couple months ago, kind of giving my thoughts on it. Do you think CBI as we know it, okay, citizenship by investment, okay, with no physical presence or very minimal physical presence, do you think it's a done deal? It's dead. There's no prospects for that type of CBI going forward in the European Union?
Thanks for having me opine first off the bat. Yeah, I think as it exists now, yes, or at least as the Malta program existed, I do believe it's over because, the big piece that was criticized in Malta's CBI was its transactional nature, right? And so I think in the eyes of the EU, if a country has a citizenship by investment program and it has rules stipulating saying you donate this, therefore you get this, there is no ability for the European Union to kind of paternalistically let some people in and not let others in, because the rules are the rules, right, for that program. And I think the European Union wants not only to be able to have some sort of discretion, but also to be able to lean on or adjudicate. They want to leave themselves the ability to have some sort of final say over a program. And I would also argue that I do think that Europe tends to focus on, one or two issues at a time and happens to be reactive. And so in this case, their big concern is, is people who are, a citizen of a country that they're currently in a conflict with, right? So they're worried about Russians getting citizenship in Malta and then suddenly having EU access. But in 5 years, it could be a different country. It could be somebody else. And so I think they really want to be able to have the ability to have that final say. And I'll finish with a slightly different example, and that is, the kind of amorphous nature of Austria's supposed citizenship by investment, which it really isn't. It's exceptionally high in terms of its price point, and it is kind of it's almost like a citizenship by exception, where not only are you putting a lot of money to work, but you're also hiring people, you're advancing like a headline opportunity for the country, right? And so in that scenario, there really is this incredible level of discretion that the government has to provide you with citizenship or not. And I think the EU likes that really high level of discretion because it allows them to let in the people they want and to not let in the people they don't want.
Yeah, the great points, Patrick. You're right. The ECJ opinion really relied on what they call the transactional nature of the Maltese citizenship by investment program. I'll just read this two-sentence excerpt from paragraph 120, okay, which is the penultimate paragraph of the judgment portion of the opinion. It says, thus, the 2020 investor citizenship scheme was publicly presented by the Republic of Malta as a naturalization scheme offering primarily the benefits arising from union citizenship. Side note, that's an important part of the opinion. In particular, the right to move and reside freely in the other member states. That presentation helps to establish that by means of that scheme, that member state established a transactional procedure which amounts to the commercialization of the grant of nationality of a member state by making use of the rights attaching to union citizenship for the purpose of promoting that procedure. So, I can't help but think, Patrick, and we're joined by Patience as Alpha here as well, too. I can't help but think that it kind of seems that um, the Maltese program was punished for being basically transparent, right? The transparency is kind of being punished. It's not the case that the Maltese citizenship by investment program granted citizenship to everybody who met the headline requirements. In fact, they did deny, and if I'm not 100% sure, but I believe that Malta put forth stats showing that they denied, I believe, 25% or something like that of the applicants. Not 100% sure of that. I'll try to check that later on in this space. But they Malta does not grant citizenship to everybody who meets the headline requirements, but they have a transparent program that has clearly delineated criteria that people can follow. Austria doesn't really have that level of transparency. They have an opaque program, right? Which, generally when we're talking about matters of governance and democratic governance and fairness, right? Typically, transparency is kind of, more rewarded than opacity. But it seems here that that kind of is not the case, right? So yeah, I agree that other program, any other country that's in the EU that's considering possibly putting forth something that's akin to a CBI program, they're going to be looking into those references to the transactional nature, right? To me, if I'm designing a program, what that means basically is I gotta, if I'm doing a CBI program, I gotta tie people's eligibility and their chances of eligibility to aspects that don't sound just like, hey, you pay this money, you get this thing, right? What would that be? I would guess that would lean more towards the idea of links and investment, not non-monetary investment into the country, right? Connection to the country, right? And that brings us to this topic of genuine links, right? The genuine links, okay, and I don't mean genuine links as a legal term of art. It is a legal term of art in the in this context of the ECJ and the Michelati opinion and Notabom, but I mean genuine links more in the realm of just building connections with your country. Okay, I think it's an important point. Okay, it's an important part. I tell my clients, and I'd be curious also to what you do, Patrick. But I tell my clients when they're naturalizing in another country or even applying for verification of citizenship, to try to actually build some sort of connection with the country. Okay, now you have to tread softly here, right? Because when you're talking about connection that leads to physical presences over a certain period of time, you're possibly hitting a tripwire that leads to other obligations that could be troublesome. But when you're talking about learning the language, joining affinity organizations, showing doing things that create a record, okay, right? Build a record of your connection to the country and activities that you do, especially if they're specifically for citizens. Those are things that I think down the line, and this is, kind of my own, research analysis mixed with a little bit of speculation. I think these are the things that make the citizenship more robust for the applicant. Okay, it's plausible. It's not just plausible. It's happened before that a person tries to enter visa free in another country as a citizen of a particular country, and that country, that receiving country, challenges whether the person actually is a citizen of that other country, right? This happened fairly recently last year with a Chinese national who attained Vanuatuan citizenship by investment, and I believe he was trying to travel to the Philippines. And the Philippines basically said, no, we don't really consider you a citizen of Vanuatu. Like, what are your connections? You don't know anything about the country. I think the guy didn't even know like where the country was located on a map. He had never been to the country. And so as a result, he had a challenge by a third country to his citizenship, basically claiming like, we're not going to treat you actually as a citizen of Vanuatu. So moving forward for, in Europe, if you're an applicant for, a residence by investment in Europe or citizenship by investment or citizenship by exception in Europe, right? I think that, one of the lessons of this ECJ opinion is, you want to be able to show that you have, some sort of tie to the country, right? That you can point to, right? Now that's on an individual level, right? For program designers moving forward, I'm thinking that they're going to be trying to, implement little type of, small little thresholds and kind of guidances, and maybe, I don't know, maybe as a practical matter, practitioners start, showing to their applicants, hey, we want you to build the, 5 types of connections to this country. Okay. We want them to be in these, 3 or 4 different categories. You can choose, whatever you like, but, if you don't know what to do, here are some things that we recommend. And Malta did have some, Maltese practitioners, multi CBI practitioners did kind of have some things like that. But I'm thinking that that's going to be much more robust of a tactic, much more common of a tactic moving forward. I don't know. That's what I think. What do you think, Patience? What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, I think I see it in two different realms, right? And so there is the, I guess, I don't want to say legal, but like tactile, demonstrable ties to a country. That could be like having a financial identifier. In the United States, we have our social security number. In Canada, it's a social insurance number. In the UK, it's a national insurance number. In Italy, it's a codice fiscale. It's like a tax ID. It just shows you that you have some representation in a system beyond citizenship, right? You don't have to file taxes, but if you were to file taxes in those countries, you would need that ID. Um, yes, visits to the country, in extreme cases, maybe you wanted to, maybe you need to show some type of, you know, uh, financial tie to the country, be that in an investment in a business or real estate. I think that's pretty extreme, but just shows you that you have some tie to the country that's documented. That's one side of the coin. And then the other, and I bring this up because of the example you used with Vanuatu, is the cultural tie to the country. And I don't want to get too deep into it because it becomes a little intellectual, but there's a difference between a citizenship you possess, particularly if you have multiple citizenships, and your cultural identity, right? And so if you're in a part of the world where those are very similar, which passport you're showing a customs official or immigration official, and who you identify as a culture, if those are not aligned, people are going to openly question you. And I think I think that tends to be fairly common in East Asia. But also at the same time, we're talking about Europe, and those concepts are very alive and well there as well. So, you see this a lot with language in the EU. Do you speak the language, right? If you show up and it happens a lot with citizenship by descent because almost all of those programs don't have a language requirement, and so if you are gallivanting around Europe on a German passport and you don't speak German, most of the time you'll be fine because English is the clearance language of the world, so to speak. But there will be situations where people will say, why is this person using this travel document if they are clearly not German, right? So I think those genuine ties are ways. Those two frameworks are a good way to assess your ties to a country. And I don't really run into this issue too frequently because citizenship by descent tends to be a lot more robust than citizenship or residency by investment. But I do think because citizenship by investment and residency by investment are a little bit more fragile, so to speak, that anything you can do that you can demonstrate a tie to the country enhances the strength of that program.
Yeah, absolutely. So I posted an article link from the Philippines immigration department. It's called BI Chinese Man Disguised as Vanuatu Citizen at NAIA. And this is an interesting line from the article. Investigation conducted by BI's Border Control and Intelligence Unit initially revealed that Cooper speaks very fluent Chinese and could hardly converse in English. He has never gone to Vanuatu, and he knows nothing about the South Pacific nation and its culture. He uses a Chinese mobile phone. It was learned that Cooper was put on BI's alert list after informants tipped the bureau about his fake Vanuatuan citizenship. So I'll have to follow through with this. I thought I remember from the time, and this was 20, I think it was 2023. I think it actually turned out that he was a Vanuatuan citizenship by investment. So I'll check into that and update basically the spaces. But the bottom line is, right, if this guy was a Vanuatuan citizenship, or even if he was disguised as one, he didn't do the basics to have any type of knowledge about the citizenship, right? And that raises red flags. I definitely agree with you, Patrick, that this is a bigger concern, generally speaking, for citizenship by investment and residency by investment because of the microscope that's placed on them and the the high level of pressure. Citizenship by descent is not entirely insulated from this as well either, especially when there's a language requirement. There was a guy a few years ago, I believe it was 2021. He obtained Hungarian citizenship naturalization, simplified naturalization. That has a language component. He had acquired it several years before. I believe it was 10 years prior, roughly. So right when the law passed around 2011. And then he went to a Hungarian consulate to renew his passport, and he was struggling to speak Hungarian, through in the process. That raised a flag with the Hungarian consular officials, and they basically started challenging whether he actually had been entitled to that citizenship. He got he basically was presented with an affidavit, claiming that he actually did not speak Hungarian and he never spoke Hungarian. And he signed the affidavit that effectively laid the framework for him to be stripped of the citizenship. That was a huge mistake, obviously, on his part. I won't get in too much into that, but the bottom line is, don't ever sign something you have not read and understood thoroughly. But the bottom line is, he ended up having to try to fight back, to reobtain his Hungarian citizenship because of the red flags that were raised by him not being able to speak Hungarian when he went to renew his passport. I don't think that that's a terribly common, occurrence, but it's a good illustrative case, right? To understand that when you obtain a citizenship, even if it's by descent, right, you kind of want to be aware of some of these pitfalls, right? Some places that could be sensitive spots where somebody, either an official of your own country or an official of a third country in which you're trying to obtain some sort of springboard benefit, challenges you and challenges whether you're actually a citizen. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. Patience, any thoughts on, and it's okay if you can't speak, we'll move on to the next topic if you can't, but Patience, do you have any thoughts on what a future CBI country in Europe would look like after this April ECJ opinion on Malta, if one exists?
If I may play the devil's advocate here, um, there are things in various EU countries that where there's a form of a social contract between people in order to get some benefits, and I couldn't and I can see a point of view from where people would be challenging uh, folks seen as foreigners because they are trying to get access to those benefits. I'll give you an example: healthcare. There's we have in the European Union, we have a healthcare European Union card that grants you effectively, even if you're a tourist in like an EU country, that grants you access, provided you are a resident of one of the other EU countries, right? Not necessarily a citizen, but a resident, meaning you pay into the pot. Um, there's a huge part of some of the EU countries, and namely the like the heavyweights one, like France and Germany and Spain. A huge part of their GDP goes towards social benefits, and even like part of their constitution actually specifically. Um, if I talk about the French one starts with a mention that the republic is a social, and it's like a social republic with solidarity embedded, and seeing So from that point of view, I can see why the ECG would be um, would be saying that we have foreigners um, getting those benefits as like a backdoor of a CBI program. There has always been in the EU this idea that people can come and get those benefits provided that they pay the cost. And that's what many generations have made. Even fairly wealthy people, they're getting decimated by taxes. um so I don't really like, obviously, as like a geek on that, I would love to see more of this. I think what you said earlier is on point, meaning the more publicity there is around a naturalization process, um, the more it has risks of being challenged. Um, because if we think fairly, like every country has some form of citizenship by exception. I mean, France has been doing that forever. Spain has been doing that forever, even if they are social democratic countries, right? But I don't know, like, to me, I've seen, as a as a European, I've seen generations of people paying into the pot like crazy. So as like a devil's advocate, I'll be like, why do we have like a fairly easy access for some insanely wealthy people to come and get the same kind of it's as if you make your money somewhere else and then you move to the EU and then you can get the benefits. You know what I mean? I don't really have a strong opinion. It just, I could see both ways.
Yeah, so let's steelman for a moment the ECJ opinion. So the two articles, one of the two articles that are cited heavily in the opinion is Article 20 of the TEF Article 20. By the way, it's linked. If anybody wants to pull it up, it's linked to the space. But Article 20, subsection 2 says citizens of the Union shall enjoy the rights and be subject to the duties provided for in the treaties. They shall have inter alia means among other things. A, the right to move and reside freely within the territory of the member states. Then there's B, then there's C, the right to enjoy in the territory of a third country in which the member state of which they are nationals is not represented, the protection of the diplomatic and consular authorities. So the idea is that by being a citizen of a country that's a member of the EU, the person kind of has two citizenships. One is the domestic country citizenship. The other one is European Union citizenship. And European Union citizenship, of course, has benefits that are provided, right, by other member states of the Union, right? So the idea is obviously that by plugging into EU citizenship, you are able to incorporate into this lattice work of rights, okay? And those rights and benefits are provided in part by other members, right? That's the obligation part. That's the part of obligation to other member states, okay? And I think that kind of speaks to what you're saying, what you're talking about, patience, right? The ECJ's rationale is kind of that Malta has, and not just Malta, in theory, all the EU member states have this obligation to one another, right? Vis-a-vis their own citizenship because of the benefits that are triggered, the Springboard benefits that are triggered in fellow member states, right? It's not a crazy. It's by no means is it a crazy argument, to be made, right? And I could see it. The way I would look at it from a I guess ethical or logical standpoint is the more springboard benefits are allowed, the heavier springboard benefits, especially the ones that incur a financial obligation on other members of the EU, right? Then the more of a right the the European Union, the EU Commission could possibly, the more of a right they could claim to infringe upon basically a country's domestic nationality policy. And on the flip side, the fewer the springboard benefits, right? The less probably the EU Commission should have a right to basically infringe on the naturalization policy of an EU country, right? Because to the extent that there are lesser springboard benefits that are offered, right, there's less of a claim, right, that, your obligation to other member states is being infringed by you having, a CBI program that offers a transactional citizenship to investors, right? But question for you, Patience. So if we extend kind of your point or your argument, right? Residency, we know, generally speaking, right, that unless we're talking about the United States, residency in a country and a lot of physical presence, these tend to be kind of two of the common tripwires for basically countries claiming a person as tax resident. So given that that's the case, right, is the upshot, okay, that, hey, if you're going to offer some sort of citizenship by investment, we want you to be present enough so that you are in our tax net, you pay into the pot, and therefore we don't mind as much you enjoying these benefits of the third party countries. Is that kind of the extension, Patience, of what you think is the best argument from the EU Commission?
Yes, and that is already what is going on. If if we take a country like Belgium, Belgium has a fairly, pretty much every EU country have a fairly straightforward path for naturalization with residents, but in their conditions they make it clear, either you are like, in most cases, either you are an employee, and the way they word it in the requirements, they tell you you have to be an employee, and you have to provide confirmation of you paying social charges as an employee. And if you are self-employed, they are actually demanding, when you file, that you give them the receipt from you paying the social charges as a self-employed individual. So for them, it really matters that someone who is residing and claiming and applying for citizenship has been paying into the pot. It is the condition of being a tax resident and of participating into the system is something that is really ingrained into EU programs. There are ways, obviously, where someone could do things, like there are tax treaties. There are reasons where you could, in theory, be a resident, file a tax return, but not necessarily have something due. But still, it is part of the spirit of the law, in a way.
Right. And Patience, you're big on writing about potential educational benefits that are provided by certain citizenships. Little anecdote from my own life. I was an exchange student at the University of Versailles in Saint Quentin for my fall 3L year of law school. I paid $19,000 for that semester. That was the rate of University of Miami. My classmates were French citizens. The vast majority of them were French and French citizens. A few of them were citizens of other European Union countries. They paid 200 euros. 200 euros, same, not a single difference in the instruction or education that we got. I paid 19,000. They paid 200, right? So for younger people or people who are going to have children, right, that's a real that's a real benefit, right? In terms of real financial benefit, basically, right, by being a citizen of that country or the EU. And generally speaking, a lot of countries in the EU, both for elementary school levels as well as colleges, they have a few different rates. Sometimes they'll have a rate that's just for citizens or residents of the country. They'll have a second rate sometimes that's for other EU citizens. Sometimes those first two categories are lumped in together. And then oftentimes they'll have a third category, which is non-EU citizens, non-EU residents, and that'll be a lot more. This is not something that's peculiar to the EU. Lots of places have it. We have our own system in the United States, okay, which is in-state resident tuition for state schools and out of state, right? So UCLA, UC Berkeley, right, have one rate for in-state per year. And then for out of state residents, and then also for foreign citizens, they have another rate, which is several times. It's usually, between 2 to 4 times the rate, right? So the bottom line is it's a real thing. Okay, Springboard, you get access to Springboard benefits in other EU countries by becoming an EU citizen, right? So okay, so anything else? Anybody else want to add anything on that topic before we move on to our next subtopic? Okay, we're good. Okay, so EU visa, the EU visa-free suspension mechanism for CBI countries. Okay, so it was reported about a month ago, and for people who have been following the space, we know that the EU Commission has been working on basically implementing a mechanism whereby they can more easily suspend visa-free access of citizens from countries that also offer citizenship by investment, right? This is yet another attack vector, right, for citizenship by investment, and it has a few different effects, right? One effect is obviously, the possible, concern, right, for prospective applicants for CBI, as well as people who already got citizenship by investment in that country, to lose access, visa-free access to the EU, right? That's obviously one huge concern. That's one, sub-component of the attack vector. But the other one is these types of actions also put pressure on the CBI program by citizens of their own country, right? If you're a citizen of, let's say, Caribbean citizenship by investment program countries, so Grenada, for example, and you see that your country's visa-free access is being put in the hot seat, is being put under a microscope, right? That's a pressure point for the CBI program, right? Because while obviously citizens of the country want to enjoy the benefits, the financial benefits of the CBI programs to the extent that they flow to them, these people obviously don't want to lose visa-free access to other parts of the world as a result, right? So, I've long been, I say long, I guess for about 3-4 years now, I've kind of been, telling clients, telling people, and basically writing and saying that if you're getting Caribbean citizenship by investment, specifically to gain visa-free access to the European Union, be well aware that there's a good chance, possibly a majority chance, that access is going to be attacked, if not eliminated, within a 5 to 10 year period. That was kind of the time period that I would kind of cite, right, for people starting in about 2021, right? So here's my open question to anybody who wants to take it. Patrick, Patience, or we got Mr. Frog here as well. How much of an attack vector is implementation of a visa-free suspension mechanism for CBI countries? How much of an attack vector is this to CBI programs in the Caribbean?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty significant attack vector. I think, I mean, I'm putting on a little bit of a business marketing hat here, but these Caribbean CBI programs, I mean, for those who don't know, the history of a lot of these Caribbean countries is to have a tie to a former, colonial power. And so, culturally, a lot of these countries have some sort of historical tie to a European country, whether that's, whether that's useful today is a little bit, a little bit of a different question. But the key piece to take away from it is that when they designed these programs, the number one selling point was the visa-free access. And so, should you be investing in a citizenship solely based on this visa-free access? I would argue no. But a lot of these programs, this was their biggest marketing pitch. It wasn't being part of the Eastern Caribbean bloc of countries. It wasn't the right to live and work and stay on a Caribbean island. It was the visa-free access. And so there is a little bit, there is a little bit of a chicken and egg problem with that as the value justification. But then on the flip side, to take the opposite side of the coin, like, what is the most valuable thing to individuals? If it is visa-free access to Europe, and you're not in Europe and you're a Caribbean country, you're probably going to lean on that, right? So, I think if access to Europe is your primary concern, there's probably a better way to go about, investing in a golden visa or a residency by investment, as opposed to a CBI that essentially has outsourced its control over its visa-free access.
Yeah, benefits that rely on a third party country are more vulnerable, right? Obviously, right? A country's citizens only get visa free access to a third country by the grace and of that third country and by agreement with that third country, oftentimes reciprocal agreement, but not always. So that's a huge vulnerability, right? You're getting citizenship by investment in this country, okay? And you're hoping to benefit obviously from the visa-free access that that country's citizenship gives. What is that visa-free access dependent on? Okay, well, it's dependent on your country's relationship with foreign countries. It's dependent on how much care your country gives to trying to establish and visa-free agreements. Okay, it's dependent on articles that are written by rags like the Guardian, okay, that vilify citizenship by investment, that have a mission to kind of see it shut down, see it be destroyed. Those are volatile benefits, right? And Patrick, as you and I have spoken about before, that doesn't mean they're to be considered non-existent. That doesn't mean you shouldn't consider them as a benefit. It doesn't mean you shouldn't get citizenship in large part based off of the visa-free access. It just means that that benefit of visa-free access has to be discounted appropriately, okay, to account for the volatility. And that's kind of where my beef comes with what I call the difference between citizenship by investment salespeople versus citizenship by investment, or let's call mobility consultants, advocates, advisors. The latter category really looks out for the person and tells them, gives full disclosure, okay, to what we're seeing, with regards to citizenship's benefits, what we think is going to be the case, attack vectors, even when disclosing those attack vectors threatens your ability to make the sale, so to speak, right? But this is a serious topic, right? And when people get citizenship, typically they're trying to get something, or they think they're getting something for life, and something that can be sometimes passed on to future generations. If you're paying $140,000 plus, okay, for a citizenship, right? I think a lot of people's expectation is that this is going to be a benefit that's going to last them for a long time, right? So, yeah, I see this, obviously, obviously I see this as a major attack vector to Europe, Caribbean citizenship by investment. The question becomes, if you have to discount visa-free access to Europe, right, appropriately for a Caribbean CBI or any other CBI that has visa-free access to the European Union, what is the main value? What's the unique value proposition or the main value proposition of these citizenships, right? Especially if it's citizen. Maybe that's what the question should have always been, actually, right? Maybe the question always should have been, what is the main, value proposition of these Caribbean CBIs? Even though the headline value is often cited as visa-free access to a certain number of countries, I've long, said that I don't think that's actually the main value proposition. But yeah, let's have that be the next question. Question for either Patience or Patrick, or if anybody's listening anonymously that wants to join. If Caribbean CBI visa-free access is an imminent threat of being removed, or if it does become eventually moved, what are the top 2 or 3 major value propositions of citizenship in the 5 Caribbean countries?
Yeah, I think the main benefit would be the right to live and work in those countries or in the Eastern Caribbean bloc. And I think it also, the other big valuable piece, and I think it's expensive for what it is, but it is an insurance policy. We've spoken about, what is the right number of citizenships to have. And, there was broad consensus, it's 3+. And I think if you're sitting there and you in a major country and you have a second citizenship and you want a third so that you always have the ability to, renounce one, I think that, and you geographically can't go anywhere, then yeah, I think that's I think Caribbean CBI is an expensive option, but I think that it makes sense there if that magic number is 3. As it relates to Europe, I think it comes down to again, what we spoke a little bit about with Malta, I don't think Europe likes that. It's not that it's just transactional; it's that it's perceived to be transactional, right? The old unfortunate adage, "Perception is reality." I think that in the case of Caribbean CBIs, it doesn't matter the diligence. It doesn't matter the history of whether they've run a really, bulletproof program or if it's been subject to, fraud 20 years ago or whatnot. The perception is that it's transactional, and therefore Europe's going to take issue with it. And so if I was running one of these programs, I personally would be trying to remarket it as something beyond just European access. And I'm trying to keep the Europe spotlight on it, but I think marketing it as a luxury insurance option for people who want multiple citizenships is pretty valuable. But I do think in an environment where you don't have European access, I do think that price comes down, at least to what they used to be priced at.
Yeah, I think if visa-free access to Europe is stripped, the remaining major value propositions are: one, what you said, the ability to live and work in the country, right? Two, the possibility of a more integrated CARICOM, so a CARICOM that actually looks like the European Union, okay, whereby you can actually go to another Caribbean, a citizen of one Caribbean country, you can go to another one and just set up shop, okay, and start living and working without having to file additional forms, etc. The third one is what I call roughly the bridging residency, right? Which technically is still living there, but the reason I distinguish the bridging residency is basically, it's kind of like an immediate emergency option to get out of where you're at and have a place to bug out that you don't want to live necessarily long term, but you can stay there comfortably until you figure out what is actually the next step. Okay, so if you have to or want to leave your country in a big hurry, right, you bug out to one of your countries of citizenship, even if it's not where you want to live long term, and you set up there, you use it as a bridging residency for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months, okay, until you figure out what the next step is where you want to go. The next one is passport, another country that quote unquote entitles you, and obviously it's not a 100% entitlement, but entitles you to request a passport and to get an actual travel document. Again, I don't mean a passport meaning the visa-free access that's associated with the citizenship. I mean literally just a country that will issue you a travel document that you can then use to enter other countries as a valid document and to use for visa stamping, right? And then possibly more, maybe more of a latent benefit is the possibility of using one of those countries to claim tax residency in, right? So that you are shielded from other countries that you might have a foot in, right? That have a much higher tax rate, right? So if you're kind of nomadic, if you're not fully, integrated in one place, and you're citizen in a CBI country that has a extremely low income tax rate or 0% tax rate, and then let's say you do also travel or spend a few months a year in a country that's much more kind of has much higher tax rate, maybe it's going to be a benefit for some of the people to use that Caribbean CBI of theirs to try to kind of claim a tax residency there. So that's what I see as the major. Obviously there's more benefits, additional consular assistance. There's way more benefits, right, that are kind of more niche and have particular use cases. But as far as the benefits that matter the most to the most number of people, that's what I see these Caribbean CBI countries offering, right? If visa-free access to Europe is stripped from them, and I would even say for the first two benefits that I mentioned, even with European visa-free access, still the most important benefit is the highest immediate right of entry and residency in the country. Patience, any thoughts?
Well, it sounds like you said, we have a set of customers with different needs. We have the folks who like literally just need visa-free travel as a benefit of the citizenship. So that's the Nigerians. That's I mean, there's a set of countries like that that they market to. We have the set of people who live in the Middle East that will never get naturalized where they reside. They will still draw their income from over there. They are tired of applying for visas, so it kind of makes sense for them. All of a sudden, this clientele is gone, or at least the benefit that they draw from the citizenship is severed, right? I still see a small clientele. I forgot the name, but there are a few people that do it smartly, that literally just use this citizenship as a springboard towards another uh, citizenship naturalization via a residency. So like citizenship in a CBI country plus a golden visa somewhere. I know there's a bunch of Bitcoiners that do that in Portugal. They've been doing that. So in that case, there's literally no impact for them. But marketing-wise, like Patrick said, yeah, it's gonna be hard. Gonna have to redesign all of those signs to hide the Schengen visa free travel as a benefit. I would say in terms of monetary value, the citizenship by investment program gets severely affected. On top of that, you also have the U.S. travel ban that also targets them. Um,
That's just a possibility for now. Just to be clear for third party listeners, there's not a travel ban yet that's targeting CBI citizens.
yeah, correct. I'd say I don't know. I mean, to me, it has always been to me those citizenship by investment programs the Caribbeans have. I've always seen them as a springboard towards something better. Like it's I wouldn't say it's get it and then forget and then like rely on it until you die kind of proposition. um, I would say you get it and you keep your eyes wide open for something else. In that context, maybe it doesn't affect um, that much. I was looking at the stats when the Antigua program. They have a PDF on their website that lists the various citizenship of the applicants, and obviously people with another citizenship that grants them a travel document that is pretty strong. Those peoples are few and rare. There's like you have one British here, you have one French here every year, but and a few Americans, but they're fairly small percentage of the clientele. So um, I I reckon they're gonna have to go and strike a deal, figure it out.
Yeah, and one other benefit that we didn't really talk about is the ability to kind of toggle to another nationality. I guess patience, you kind of touched on a little bit. So an example, okay, Iranians, and I use this example in I think the last spaces. Iranians currently are dealing with a visa issuance and entry ban, okay, to the United States. There's some exceptions for that, and there's some exemptions, right? One of the exceptions is, of course, an Iranian that's citizen of another country, and if the other country is not subject to the visa ban. Now, this might not be a great example, Iranians, for the purposes of the Caribbean CBI, because most of the Caribbean CBIs won't accept an Iranian. And there might be one or two, I think, that consider an Iranian if they've been resident outside of the country for at least 5 years, or if they're applying under another nationality. But the bottom line is, and again, this is also a springboard use, just like you said, patience. If you want to have the ability to nationality toggle in order to access a third country, right? Well, Caribbean citizenship by investment might be one of the options for you. Okay, so if you're Syrian national, or Iranian, or Venezuelan, and you want to have access to a country in some way, shape, or form that is antagonistic to your first country of citizenship, or possibly has legislation actually directly targeting those citizens, by picking up a second citizenship and then presenting like Caribbean CBI, and then presenting yourself to the third country as a citizen of the second. And I don't mean not disclosing the first citizenship. I don't mean not disclosing. I mean just actually applying for the third country's programs, using the passport of the Caribbean CBI, marking yourself, primarily as a national of that country. That can be a springboard benefit to a third party country. Now, the problem is that's kind of an expensive springboard, right? One problem with springboarding as a tactic, right, as great as it is, as great as it can be, it's another level of complexity that's being added. Okay. And when you have a system, okay, a solution that relies on a system with another level of complexity, that's another point of failure. Okay. So, if you go out of your way to get a springboard mobility benefit in order to, land on a third country, right? A couple things can happen while you're executing that plan. Okay. It could be that the third country no longer provides the exception, okay, for the springboard. It could be that the springboard takes so long for you to get that it's no longer of interest to you or of as much benefit to you to basically, be able to, get to the landing country. So there are drawbacks to springboards, and obviously an expensive springboard, right? That's a drawback, right? Because effectively you're spending all this money in order to, get to someplace better, as Patience said, right? Okay, so that's the Caribbean CBI, possible attack vector from the EU, implementation of a visa-free suspension mechanism. Let's move on to ETIAS. Okay, ETIAS. This is like the electronic travel authorization program that just gets infinitely delayed. Okay, pushed back and back. And I don't know when the idea was first introduced, but I believe it was. I think it's like 6 years ago now, 7 years ago, maybe 2018, 2019. And what I'm talking about basically is the program for people who are citizens of countries that have visa-free access to Europe. Okay, basically a program that's going to require them to fill out an electronic application first. Okay, get the approval electronically before they board their flight to go. Okay, so this is the same program. This is the same thing that we have in the United States. It's called ESTA. Okay, it's basically filling out an electronic form. Okay, before you're able to enter the country. ETIAS, the last I checked, okay, which is an article from April of 2025, so 2 months ago. Last I checked, the expected implementation of ETIAS has been pushed to 2026. Okay, now history says that there's a good chance that that's going to be pushed back again. Okay, but I think we probably all agree. Tell me if you don't agree that eventually it's coming. Okay, what are the problems that ETIAS is going to implement? Okay, this is kind of what I'm thinking about. Right now, it's billed as, oh, that's no problem. You just fill out this questionnaire. It's only 8 or 10 questions, and it's not a big deal. It takes 2 minutes. Okay, but if you study the history of information gathering, electronic application procedures, it's just a matter of time until that information that's being collected eventually starts being used. Okay, and starts being used to exclude people that are not desirable to come into Europe, basically. So I'm thinking about, first and foremost, people who have criminal records. Second, people who have traveled to countries that are unpopular, so-called naughty countries or war zones. And then third of all, I'm thinking about people who are public on social media with comments, statements, and views that are considered hateful, that are considered, not acceptable, by Europe. These are the first three things that come to my mind. Okay, so question for Patrick. What do you think about ETIAS? Do you think, first of all, that it's going to be implemented by the end of 2026? And then secondly, do you think it's really just going to remain a form that people fill out and it's not a big problem? Or do you think people, specifically Americans, are going to start really being denied based off of their profile eventually?
Yeah, great question. Gosh, there's a lot of different ways we can look at this. As far as ETIAS, I did have to double check. It was first proposed in 2016 and then passed in 2018. And it is currently slated to be operational in the last quarter of 2026. So we're still theoretically more than 12 months out from this. Do I think it will be pushed back again? Yes, I do. Which would be foolish because there's so much more travel to Europe in the summer. And so they probably are not going to want to roll this thing out after April. They're probably going to want to roll it out somewhere between October and April. So if they push it past April of 2027, it's going to be a horrible time to roll it out, and it'll probably just get pushed additionally further. This is one of the situations where just on its face value, it looks like a couple questions, and it's a pretty I don't even know if they keep re-indexing the price of what it will be, because in 2016 prices were a lot lower. But it is a pretty meager, price in euros. But I think you're right to ask, what is it going to turn into, right? And the question also is not just what is it going to turn into, but what is it going to turn into for whom, right? And I think if someone's traveling from, say, the Middle East, I think that process potentially might be a lot more challenging than, say, family of 5 coming from America for their week trip in Paris. And whether or not that's fair is its own discussion. But I think Europe's basically looking at this a few ways. They know that they are the destination of choice for most of the world, either for vacation or for business. And so being able to say, oh, even though this is a mediocre price point, at its source, it's just a way to generate revenue for the European Union. And we get that. But that price can then be ratcheted up, possibly. If it went to 30 euros, I don't think you would see a noticeably big change in travel to the EU. I think now it's like 9 or something, 9 euros or something. The price point keeps changing, as it has with the UK's version. And then on top of that, I think there's all of this, the political economy of Europe as it relates to travel and immigration is like a pretty hot button issue, and it is going to be for a generation. And so I think part of that is going to be is the European Union wanting to be able to say, we want a better grasp of yes or no as to who we allow to travel to the EU. Looking at the Ukraine conflict right now, if someone from Russia is traveling to the EU, I don't think they have access currently on a Russian passport. But let's say they have a second passport from a non-EU country, a Kazakh passport, and they want to travel to the EU on that. Well, then they'd have to get ETIAS, and through that application process, it would be clear who this person was, and the EU could deny them entry. And so even though it's just a few questions and a pretty minimal price point, it's effectively the introduction of a control factor for who can come in and out of the EU. And I don't think when it rolls out, it will be drastic, and I don't think it's going to impact Americans very much. But 5 years down the line, it could. And if Europe does not have a First Amendment, and that's pretty evident through all of the different patchwork of laws as to what governs speech there. Some stuff is deemed hateful. I believe there's still a country where you can't criticize royalty. And keeping track of those in the American mind is goofy and inconvenient. And so, yeah, you can say something controversial like, I don't like beans on toast. Well, no, that's the UK and not the EU. But you could say something ridiculous like, I like pineapple on pizza. I don't. But if you say something like that, or I'm using a goofy example, but if that's on a social media, and therefore it gets shoved into some immigration security checkpoint API, and the EU finds that you have an opinion that they don't really care for, well, why do what do they want? Would they rather take your measly euro-denominated ETIAS fee, or do they think it's better if you just don't show up? And in the future, they might make that latter choice. I don't think it's a high probability, but any probability more than 1% on a 5-year time horizon is one that you got to be aware of. And also, I'll add, I am curious as to how ETIAS will view dual citizens. Obviously, one of the benefits of having an EU passport is that you have the right of access to the EU without dealing with ETIAS. But as the world constantly considers second and third order effects of mobility and immigration and dual citizenship programs, I think that might be something to keep an eye out for. It's not going to show up tomorrow, but maybe maybe a generation later it might.
Right. I was talking on mute again there. So the European Union website on ETIAS says that the following information is going to be asked when ETIAS is implemented. So first, personal information, including your name, date, and place of birth, sex, nationalities, plural, home address, email address, and phone number. 2, your parents' first name. 3, travel document details. 4, your level of education and current occupation. 5, the country of your first intended stay and address of your destination. Okay. And then 6, details about any past criminal convictions, past travels to war or conflict zones, and whether you have recently been the subject of a return decision. Okay. So this is only 6 bullet points, but really, if you unpack this is a lot of information that's actually being asked, right? Past criminal convictions. Americans, there's tens of millions of Americans that have a criminal record. Okay, so it's estimated at least 45 million Americans have at least a misdemeanor conviction, and an estimated at least 20 million have a felony conviction, right? That's at least, okay, that's just the convictions. We're not talking about, of course, arrests, okay? The way requesting this information works, okay, and kind of their inevitable use against people is that the information is always or oftentimes used first against the most unsympathetic figure that you can imagine. Okay, so a guy is a pedophile. Okay, convicted of pedophilia, went to prison for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, whatever. Okay, maybe that's a bad example actually, because pedophiles also have to, in the United States, have to have an annotation written in their passport. But let's say pedophile or somebody who's convicted of a heinous crime. Okay, they fill out the application for ETIAS. Okay, and then they're denied. Okay, or maybe let's say that there's pressure, okay, from the EU constituents to deny the person. Okay, and nobody cries for that guy. Okay, that pedophile or person who's been convicted of a heinous crime. Okay, that's been denied access to the US because he reported his past criminal convictions on the ETIAS. But that's the camel putting its nose into the tent for the first time. Okay, once that's done, then eventually information is used for people who've convicted of fraud or money laundering, terroristic threats. Okay, which, as we saw yesterday with the Liver King and Joe Rogan, just threatening somebody, I'm going to come beat you up. That is considered in many states to be considered a terroristic threat. Okay. If you're, an EU functionary and you're, reviewing an application that's been flagged by your software as, an ETIAS application you need to look at, and if the person writes that they were convicted of making terroristic threats, well, that's probably going to be a candidate for being denied access. My point is, eventually, the willingness to deny trickles down from people who have the most heinous crimes down to kind of run-of-the-mill crimes and misdemeanors, and people end up being denied on that. I think that's going to happen. I don't think it's going to take that long. Okay, for people with past criminal convictions, even ones that are not that terrible, okay, to start being denied access to Europe through ETIAS. The speech. Unpopular speech, I think that's going to happen eventually at some level, but I agree with you, Patrick, that's probably going to come down the line, right? Because speech is a little bit more subjective, a lot more subjective. What speech somebody has made that's considered offensive to the point that they're no longer welcome in the European Union. But a past criminal conviction is something that's easy to ask about, easy to flag, and easy to basically justify denying somebody entry on the basis of. Level of education and current occupation. Okay, why would they ask for that? Well, coming from my perspective as a U.S. trained immigration attorney, right, I'm thinking about level of education and current occupation as a possible factor for whether the person has immigrant intent to the EU. Okay, whether they're intending to just try to come on ETIAS, but because they don't have any good employment prospects back in their home country, just overstay their ETIAS and work unlawfully in the European Union. Okay. By the way, for people who apply for tourist visas to the United States, the number one reason that they're denied a tourist visa, if they're denied, is immigrant intent. right? So that's a huge potential attack vector, right? So yeah, I do believe that eventually it might take 5 years, 10 years, but people in large numbers that are Americans that are applying for ETIAS, once ETIAS is implemented in the European Union, they're going to start being denied in large numbers. Not majority, nothing like that, but enough are going to be denied that the idea that we have in the United States as American citizens that I'll just travel to Europe. There's no problem traveling to Europe. That idea is going to be shattered, in my opinion. Okay, eventually it's going to be an expectation that usually you can go to Europe. Okay, but if you don't have any past criminal conviction, but everybody's going to have known somebody that was denied. Basically, their ETIAS was denied and they weren't able to go on vacation. So, there's nothing we can do to stop the implementation of ETIAS. Eventually, it's going to come. It's probably going to be pushed back again, as Patrick said. But what you can do is, aim to obtain the highest right of entry and residence, immediate highest right of entry into the European Union, right? Citizenship in an EU country. Okay, the super tourist visa. That's what I call citizenship. What I say is nested within citizenship is a super tourist visa, right? Because even if you don't live in the country, if you're a citizen there, you have highest immediate right of entry to the country, right? And so obviously, not that EU citizens can't run through some difficulty trying to enter back into the EU, but the difficulty in denying an EU citizen access to the area is going to be much, much more difficult than just an American citizen that's applying for ETIAS. So, okay, so that's ETIAS. Free speech. What do we think about the state of free speech in the European Union? And you're right, Patrick, I put the UK in here, even though the UK is not part of the EU anymore. But, I couldn't help myself. The UK is just so much on the news, arresting people, raiding homes, okay, for social media posts, okay, social media posts that are talking about, British values, or, social media posts that are considered to be anti-immigrant, right? So there's a couple problems here, right? A couple issues. As Patrick, as you said, there's no First Amendment in Europe or European countries, right? So when you're on their territory, right, you're obviously going to be subject to free speech laws when you're there. But what about extraterritorial application, right? What about the idea of trying to hold people accountable to quote unquote hate speech laws in European Union countries, even when they're not physically present there? Okay, and this possibility of extraterritorial application falls into one of two categories. Okay, there's the first category which is what if you're a citizen of that country? So let's say you get German citizenship by descent. Okay, you're a German citizen. Okay, can Germany hold you accountable to their speech laws? Even extraterritorially, right? Well, from the international law perspective, I'm going to paint with a broad brush here, but yeah, generally they can. It's pretty generally well accepted that countries can impose extraterritorial legal obligations on their citizens, right? So that's an attack vector, right? But then what about extraterritorial application of these laws when you're not a citizen of the country? The UK tried to do this, okay, or they threatened to do so, okay, and they're still to an extent threatening to do so, right? Basically, threatening for Americans that retweet or share or post, comments and topics, even not even your own comment, okay, comments by other people, okay, that are deemed to be hate speech law or annoy. I think the language is annoy, irritate, or harass, okay, that type of thing. With the prevalence of social media, right? This is an issue, right? When you post something on social media, it doesn't belong to a particular jurisdiction. It's posted everywhere, right? Cyberspace is not terrestrial, right? So countries that are trying to police people's speeches are kind of struggling with exactly how to deal with the non tangible nature, let's call it, of cyberspace, right? So I'm a mobility professional. Patrick's a mobility professional. There's a lot of different angles to the free speech, question. But the first thing that I think about is from the mobility perspective, right? Is free speech again, we're painting with a broad brush here, but in the European Union, is it headed in such a bad direction that one should take pause in trying to apply for European citizenship by descent, right? If it's a country that's aggressive with trying to police speech, okay, is that, has the speech issue risen to the point that it should be seriously considered as a possible red flag for naturalization? What do you think, Patrick?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth that conversation with yourself. And I mean, look, the only reason that the EU can do this is because they have the technology, and they're the first essentially to do it. But most places in the world don't have a First Amendment equivalent. They just lack the technology to be able to thoroughly vet people based on their speech on the social media platforms. And so that's not to say, that's not to diminish the European case, but it is to say whatever we see in Europe is probably going to become not just a European phenomenon. Yeah, I mean, I think that's worth that conversation to yourself, because we've seen, I mean, just to make it hyper topical, we've seen people arrested and charged for free speech issues, or what an American would consider a free speech issue, in the UK, in the EU. You also see it on both sides of the aisles politically, where it creates problems. I'm looking specifically at Hungary right now. Also, on top of that, there's been a recent court case where someone was held responsible for a free speech issue that someone else shared in a group chat, which I think is, kind of remarkable. And think about it: if you're a globally mobile person and you're going between multiple jurisdictions, be there in the Western Hemisphere or in Europe, your phone is crossing all of those, and whatever's on your phone can then be subject. It can be you can receive it in the United States, catch a transatlantic flight, and then it can be on your phone in a European jurisdiction. Um, and does that mean that there are grounds to charge you with something? I don't know, but I would imagine that the potentiality exists there. Um, so I do think it's worth a conversation. Um, Not just about the risk, but also everyone knows themselves. Are you a person who really wants to put something on social media for a hot button political issue? If you're that type of person, then that's a larger serious concern for you than someone else who might have a pretty insignificant social media presence. Um, and I'll end it with the anecdote that kind of, that doesn't really exist in the United States, one to one, but do know that when you do pass through immigration in the United States, part of the background check is an immigration official's ability to do a quick flash of your profile and through an intelligence system. And if you have a huge social media presence, it's not like that is not seen in the United States. It just so happens that it's grounds for it's a ground for legal action in Europe, where here in the United States it might be just an immigration question mark, right? At an immigration processing threshold. So, we used to joke 15 years ago now that it was your crazy aunt who was, posting silly things on Facebook. But, fast forward, and we now live in a world where you see people legally arrested or punished for it in European jurisdictions. And, if that trend is not alarming, then take that trend and extrapolate it into the future, the same at the same increment over the same time horizon, and that's very quickly tomorrow. So it's definitely worth considering.
Yeah, and we're only talking so far about criminalization of speech. We're not talking even yet about civil consequences, so defamation judgments, right, or defamation claims. And in the U.S., you can't sue somebody for libel or defamation if it's protected speech under the First Amendment. And I'm speaking generally here. Obviously, the law is much more nuanced than that. And in many other countries, it's the standard for being able to defame somebody, okay, for being held liable to defame somebody is much, much lower, okay? So England and London, again, this is not the European Union, but Europe, okay? London is infamous for a venue for defamation litigants. Okay, because English defamation law has a much lower standard for what's considered defamation than the United States. So somebody's defamed you, especially if it's online, right? And the context, like as you said, Patrick, when you say something online, okay, there's 190 plus countries that can potentially make a claim for basically the speech having reached their country or being subject to their jurisdiction, right? Because online is cyberspace, right? So that's a particular issue, and as a side note, that's American citizens enjoy a little bit more protection actually from foreign defamation judgments. There is a law. It's 28. It's called the U.S. Speech Act. It's 28 U.S.C. 4102, and it protects U.S. citizens from foreign defamation judgments in jurisdictions that have a standard of protection of free speech that's less than the U.S. First Amendment. Okay, so what this means basically is that if somebody sues, if you're a U.S. citizen, somebody sues you, let's call it in London, okay, for defamation, okay, and if that speech would have been protected in the United States, okay, and if you take, if that person, if your opponent takes that foreign judgment against you, let's say they win, okay, in court in London, if they take that against you and try to collect on it in the United States, they're not going to be able to collect on it. Okay, that's the U.S. courts are not going to recognize that. Okay, um, who does it affect? It's like Patrick said, okay, people have big online personalities. Let's call them online loudmouths, right? And I don't mean that even in a derogatory way. I just mean people who have opinions, who say things, okay, people who, say less than flattering things about other people, right? That's going to matter for them. So I think Elon Musk is one, right? That's a guy, US citizen, richest man in the world, okay, hugely, vocal online, especially on X, okay. He's somebody who I expect, if he hasn't already had to, defend against, some sort of collection of a defamation judgment using the Speech Act, I think he's going to eventually have to do so, right? I think he's going to avail himself of the protection of that law, right? He's just too vocal, has too big of a platform, and he's too wealthy, right, to not, in my opinion, to not have somebody try to take a shot at him, right? So that's little benefit of U.S. citizenship, and it's actually not just U.S. citizenship; it's also for residents in the United States, right? But that's the secondary string basically of speech issues. One is the criminalization, and the other is possible civil liability as a result, right? So so something to consider if you're vocal online and if you're considering citizenship in Europe. But as Patrick said, not just Europe, other countries, a lot of other countries try to police speech too. They're just not as good at it. They just don't have the capacity, as much of a capacity to do it as Europe does. Okay, let's move on. So Italian citizenship by descent possibly being restricted. Okay, so news came out about a few months ago, and full disclosure, I'm not that up to date on the challenge. I haven't actually really dug into too many primary source documents related to the restriction on Italian CBD. But as I know, basically, the new interpretation of Italian citizenship by descent is going to limit applicants for citizenship by descent who had a grandparent that was an Italian citizen and born in Italy. That's as far as I understand it. I already know that there have been there's already legal challenges against this. And a couple of things come to my mind, okay, when I think about this. First is obviously this stings for anybody who has a claim, future or present, to Italian CBD through a great grandparent or possibly even a further generation relative. And the second thing that comes to my mind is this is just another illustration of the adage that if a benefit is available to you, you have to act immediately. Okay, present today, gone tomorrow. That's how citizenship and residency opportunities are, okay, whether it be by descent, by investment, or by other mechanisms. So I do think that if this holds, this restriction on Italian CBD to just grandparents, okay, that were born in Italy, I think it's going to impact a lot of people, okay, especially in the United States, all throughout the Americas, right? So North America, Central America, and South America, due to all the immigration, right? We had obviously tons of Italian immigrants at the turn of the 20th century, so around 1900 and thereafter, that came to the United States. Tons that came to Argentina. I believe Argentines by stock are 50% Italian. Tons that went to Uruguay, to Brazil, all up and down basically the Western Hemisphere. So, what do you think, Patrick? Do you think this is going to stick, this restriction of Italian CBD to grandparents that were born in Italy?
Oh, that's a great question. The short answer is no. But the longer answer is that Italy is a perfect case study for citizenship by descent broadly, because it is the most accommodating, or historically has been. So since 1992, up through March 28th, it was the most accommodating. You had to have an ancestor who was an Italian citizen and gave birth to children without relinquishing their Italian citizenship. And you could go back as far as 1861. And so it covered basically all three waves of Italian immigration to the Americas. But the reason Italy is such a great case study for this is because while they have the most accommodating, or had the most accommodating citizenship by descent program, it is now a lot less accommodating than the average citizenship by descent program in Europe. And Italy, at the same time, it deals with all of the internal politics that are facing a lot of European Union countries. They are Mediterranean coastal, and so they have a lot of immigrants, both legally and undocumented. And they're the people who live in Italy, you know, they like to make their voices heard on these issues. They recently had a referendum for having their naturalization process go from 10 years to 5, and it was pretty thoroughly rejected. They wanted to keep it at 10. And at the same time, you have a lot of internal politically organized coalitions, namely municipal workers, administrative workers, who don't want to have to deal with the mountains of paperwork that these programs create. And from the perspective of policymakers, they want to keep people who are citizens who have ties to the country, but at the same time, they don't want to overtax their own internal systems with all these applications, particularly if people who are obtaining citizenship are not wealthy, right? So they want it to be a net plus to their country without putting tons of resources into it. And so that was the second part. And the third part is, I think in the near future, not near, medium term future, you'll see what I described previously, which is that I think the impetus is going to be that legislators tend to want to restrict citizenship by descent, or build in additional cultural ties, be them language, or there's other aspects that enhance your committed tie to the country, or your cultural tie to the country, and they'll be expanded by courts generally. And so I think that in the medium term, you're going to see that in Italy. The new law that came into effect in late March, restricted it to grandparents, but even more restrictive is that the grandparent, if they're still living, needs to only have Italian citizenship. If they have an additional citizenship, like if they naturalize to become an American, they technically cannot be used for citizenship by descent. And if they've passed away, they had to have passed away being only an Italian citizen. And so that is among the first things that is being challenged in that law, from a legal perspective. And then I believe it was as late as yesterday, the constitutionality of the entire law was basically referred up to the Constitutional Court, because the idea is that the law says that if you're citizenship by descent, I mean, we talk about it, you're born being an Italian citizen, it's just not formally recognized. And so you going to have your citizenship by descent formally recognized, they call that reacquisition of citizenship. But how can you restrict that if people are born with it? There is a chicken and egg kind of constitutional question, and that's what's being asked before the court. And I think you'll also see, there is a large number of Italian citizenship lawyers in Italy who are friendly with judges. And so, there is this industry that they also want to support as well. And so I think you'll see a lot of confusing but hopefully beneficial outcomes to the Italian citizenship by descent. And lastly, I'll leave it here because I could talk for hours on this, but um, the thing to assume is that the safe thing to assume that I think a lot of people forget is that every country's internal division of government powers is different than the United States. If a law is found to be unconstitutional in the United States, that's it. That's the end of the conversation, and administrative policy changes. In Canada, if something's found to be unconstitutional, it gets shoved back to the legislator so they can correct the law. In European countries, there's a whole host of different outcomes. In Italy, there is no such thing as legal precedent. If a constitutional court rules one way, they're ruling on the constitutionality of something. If there's a lower court that rules on some other aspect of the law, it may not necessarily have precedence in other local court, like commune courts. And so essentially what that means is there can be a lot of confusing policy. And even in practice, whether you go before a court or go in front of a consulate, the court system could be operating under different guidelines than the guidance at a consulate. And then if you go up one legal level to a regional court in Italy, whatever they rule may or may not have precedence at lower courts, or may not impact the guidance issued at consulates. They get circulated through circulars, or as they call it in Italy, circolares. And so what that means is that when there's a benefit, like Italian citizenship, everyone kept running into issues at the consulates because the consulates were tired of doing all the work. At that point, I told several of my clients, you have to go through, instead of waiting a year and a half at a consulate, it's just better to go through a lawyer. It's more expensive, and on paper it looks similar, but the vectors for you to get off timeline are a lot less if you go through the court system. And so ultimately that helps people, because now we're in a situation where that benefit has been curtailed. But I do think there will be some sort of window for opportunity in the medium term. So, goes back to document dependence. Get your documents together so that when that window does open up, you can strike while the iron's hot. It's very difficult to assemble a citizenship by descent case, in a month, let alone a week. It takes years. So I think it's still beneficial to get your everything together so that you can execute quickly.
Yeah, great point. I actually linked to the Constitutional Court referral. It's to basically to underneath the spaces. So if anybody wants to click on the link, I titled it "Turin Constitutional Court Referral, Italian CBD." And shout out to Nick Lee, who DM'd me basically with the news as well as a copy. Nick Lee, he's a good follow on a lot of European CBD issues, a lot of tax issues. His handle is Nick Leslie. Okay, and he's the one who brought this on my radar. I just skimmed the referral. I haven't read it carefully, but yeah, it's there for anybody who wants to check it out. Okay, cool. So we got Robert here. Robert, I'm going to send you an invite to speak. You don't have to speak, but just going to send it to you in case you want to. And then the last thing I saw just this morning, Patrick, I believe I saw your tweet, Portuguese CBD possibly being expanded. I don't know if this is real. I don't know if it's actually, if this is just clickbait. I haven't looked into this at all. Do you know anything about this? Portugal's CBD possibly being expanded to grandparents or great grandparents? Excuse me.
I don't know the details on it. I did post it because I think when you see bills advanced for citizenship programs, the likelihood that they get through committee through a legislator is, a pretty low percentage. More than 10, less than 50, but it does give you an idea or a sense of where the policy direction is going, right? In the case of Italian citizenship, dealing with people not knowing the language, what was known at the time as the minor issue. So if, transmission of citizenship guidelines, and also truncating, the lineage, the generational limits. All of those were introduced multiple times as bills over the last year. And so if you kept your eyes on the legislator and where ideas were introduced, there was no ideas that introduced expanding citizenship by descent. They were all limiting it. And so it really gives you a sense of where the policy impetus is. And so that's why I posted the Portuguese citizenship by descent possibility, because I think, it's very, looking at Portugal right now, everyone, I know it's a popular destination for a lot of niche, globally mobile people, Bitcoiners, Californians, surfers. But, the Portuguese golden visa has been quite the gold standard for European golden visas, and your ability to convert that into Portuguese citizenship over a time horizon is pretty beneficial to a lot of people. But it's gotten a lot of flack internally from the internal politics of everyday, native-born Portuguese people. And for that reason, you've seen that it has the possibility, the golden visa, to increase from 5 years to 10. And if you're just looking at the political dynamics of the country, if you're limiting or raising the requirements for residency or citizenship, you might see someone saying, okay, well, if this was so beneficial for someone who doesn't have ties to Portugal, how do we still, we still want to bring, like people who have cultural ties to Portugal. How do we do that? And one of the ways to do that is to expand citizenship by descent. You're more likely going to get someone who comes to the country who speaks the language and cares about the history if their grandparent or great grandparent was Portuguese. There's a neighborhood close to me over here across the river in New Jersey that you walk up the street and it is all Portuguese restaurants. It's a completely Portuguese neighborhood, and they all arrived in like the 1920s because it was a rough time in Portugal, and it's a seafaring country, and they all came to work in what was then the New Jersey port. And so all of those people are great grandparents to a significant number of people today. And those people today who have that claim to the country, in the eyes of a Portuguese legislator, probably have a better cultural tie to the country than someone who can write an enormous check and show up for a week, a year, for 5 years. And I think politically that's more palatable for someone to propose that in lieu of changes to the golden visa program. And so I'm kind of wandering all over the place here, but it's my long-winded way of saying, take a look at the internal politics and the incentives of how that policy is going to change, and you can kind of see where the ideas are going, and so you can best capitalize on them.
Yeah, another benefit of becoming aware of a proposal, either legislative or otherwise, to either start a citizenship by descent program or to expand eligibility, is that you might be able to, marshal the diaspora to have a little bit of a voice vis-a-vis that bill, right? To the extent that the parliament or the country cares about the diaspora or having a connection or reconnection with the diaspora, right? Back in 2020, I was doing research on something called a Slovak Living Abroad certificate. It's what I call a semi-citizenship. It's this category of strange things, which is not exactly, well, it's not just not exactly a citizenship. It's not a citizenship. It doesn't give you a passport, doesn't give you ability to live, but it gives you some other benefits that can kind of be akin to a residency, even though it's technically not a residency either. And in my research for the Slovak Living Abroad certificate, I found out that the Slovak parliament at the time was considering greatly expanding Slovak citizenship by descent eligibility criteria. Greatly, right? So it'd been very restrictive up until that point, and they were considering expanding it to great grandchildren of Czechoslovak and Slovak citizens. Long story short, I, along with a few other members of Slovak diaspora community, kind of, put together a group of people that were interested, people who possibly might be eligible for this bill if it were ever to pass law. And that diaspora grew, and we were able to make our voices heard through meetings with legislators. We had some direct meetings with legislators. Shout out to other people that I kind of worked on with this. Samuel Durovčík, who's a talented Slovak lawyer. Zuzana Pavlović, who's a Canadian Slovak kind of migration scholar, and then another guy named John, who's an American of Slovak descent. That initial interest in the bill, okay, really grew into a powerful voice, okay, for the Slovak diaspora. Email campaigns, like I said, meetings with parliament members, and eventually the bill was passed into law. It was passed into law April 1st, and now it is Slovak, children and grandchildren, great grandchildren of former Czechoslovak and Slovak citizens, with some other criteria, but they do qualify prima facie for eligibility for Slovak citizenship by descent. If the diaspora had just dismissed the news regarding the bill because it was just a proposal and it hadn't become law, it may never have become law, okay? Because people seized on that, okay? Interested members, stakeholders in the diaspora seized on that bill, okay? And made a voice and had that voice be heard. To what extent the bill being passed into law was a result of the diaspora's voice, it's tough to tell. I know that the parliament members and stakeholders and even members of the cabinet the cabinet minister members were aware of us. I know they were. Tough to say how much of an impact it had, but it very, very well may have had some impact. So yeah, follow. If you know where your background is from, right? As a practical matter, you might want to keep an eye. Don't have to spend too much time on it, but keep an eye on news regarding any bills expanding citizenship by descent eligibility. So, okay, thank you for that, Patrick. That was a really good explanation of how different legal system structures in different countries, right, as a practical matter, result in, different in CBD opportunities presenting themselves in different ways, right? Sometimes it's a law being held unconstitutional, and then you can apply right away, okay? Sometimes it's, pushing it back down to the legislator for the legislator to pass a new, law, and then you can act. Sometimes it's, like as we discussed a few spaces back, what happened with Canada, which is basically goes back to the parliament. But then in the interim, the immigration agencies creates kind of an interim measure, for applicants to be able to apply right away, to not have to wait for parliament to pass a new law that comports with the higher court's ruling. So that was a great explanation. Thank you for that. Okay, so we're at an hour and 48 minutes. This has been a good long discussion. I'm at the end of the subtopics I wanted to discuss. If Patrick or Robert has anything else they want to say, you're welcome to say it. Otherwise, I'm going to just take a minute to talk about the next possible topics for spaces and see what topic we want to tackle next in our next spaces. So anything else, Robert or Patrick? Okay, cool. So as a reminder, this is our 12th mobility space. We're doing these Mondays and Thursdays. We're going to do 50 mobility spaces this year. Okay, at least. We may even go further. Okay, everybody's welcome to come. Anybody can speak. These are mobility spaces on the hottest topics in dual citizenship, mobility, freedom of movement, sovereignty. A few topics that we've been thinking about talking about soon, but we haven't gotten to yet are one, passing through borders safely. Okay, so the idea of what are best practices for when you're passing through a border into a new country, or whether it be your own country, okay, one of your countries of citizenship, or a third-party country, to protect your privacy, security, etc. That's one topic that I wanted to get into. Another topic was, and let me just consult my list here. Oh, okay, passport rankings. Passport rankings, what are they? Why do I, me personally, think that the vast majority of them are complete BS? Okay, so that's one topic. Okay, hot topic that we were considering talking about. Oh, residency in free cities. Okay, so free cities. Should a residency in a free city be part of your mobility portfolio, part of your portfolio of residencies and citizenships? Okay, so these are the three topics that I kind of was thinking about for the next space. I'm not married to these three topics. Patrick or Robert, if you have another topic that you think is more interesting, by all means suggest it. But otherwise, what do you guys think should be our next topic?
Ooh, I think passing through an international border is a good conversation. That's very tactical, and probably best based on it's a good legal perspective, and also good to have a legal perspective and a in practice perspective. But I also agree with you that the passport indexing is kind of ridiculous, and I think that could be a fun conversation. Maybe a later part of the week kind of conversation.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm down to have, you know what, actually, let me just correct what I said. We already have the topic for Monday's space, excuse me. Monday's space is going to be changing your name and identity, trying to change an identity in a second country of citizenship. That's going to be a really hot topic. We got Italian Stallion, Johnny, of course, hopefully Patrick coming as well, a lot of people. So that's our topic. We already have that set for Monday. This is going to be the topic for next Thursday. Yeah, let's do that, Patrick. Let's do crossing through borders safely, best practices, issues and concerns. Okay, so we'll have that be the next topic. And yeah, we'll go from there. So that's it. Thanks to everybody who showed up. Thanks to Patience. Thanks to Patrick, Robert, anybody else who listened anonymously. And feel free to join us Monday, 11 a.m. I'm sorry, Tuesday. Excuse me. I'm all over the place. I have a green card interview actually on Monday around the usual time. Tuesday, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time is going to be our next mobility space. Make sure to join. Okay. Have a great one, everybody.